Good evening. Good evening and welcome. Thank you all for coming out on this beautiful spring night. Almost spring, finally. My name is Arlene Montevecchio, and I am the director of the Center for Spirituality here at St. Mary's College. Welcome. The Center for Spirituality was founded in 1984 with generous support from the Sisters of the Holy Cross to offer programming at the intersection of faith and reason with attention to women's experience. At this time, I invite you to silence your cell phones, and I encourage you to stay through the duration of our program. Please join me at this time in welcoming President Janice A. Cervelli to the podium to give some remarks on behalf of the college.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for one of the great St. Mary's moments of the year. I always look forward to the Madeleva Lecture for the opportunity to hear our distinguished speaker on a subject that's central to all that we do at St. Mary's. The common thread connecting all the Madeleva Lectures over the past 33 years is that women are dedicated to changing the way we understand and respond to the world around us. That key objective is very much in line with St. Mary's mission as a Catholic college, and the Madeleva Lecture provides us with an exceptional platform to pursue that mission. We guide and challenge our students here at St. Mary's to discover the connections between the mind, the heart, and the soul. Yet what makes St. Mary's mission so distinct is what an enlightening evening like tonight highlights, is the sense of discovery of what it means to embrace our core values of faith and spirituality, of learning and community and justice. Empowering women to work for justice is the life's work of tonight's speaker, Amba Oduyoye, a leading African theologian and foremost scholar of African religious thought. Mercy is best known for her constant emphasis on equality in African theology and for working to give African women's voices the same prominence as men. By empowering, mobilizing, and leading action towards advancing human rights and global justice, Mercy has had great influence on helping women around the world retrieve and share their own stories, and in turn, nurturing person-oriented involvement in church and society. Elevating the contributions of women in theology has been the primary purpose of the Madeleva Lecture Series since its inception. Sister Madeleva's many accomplishments include the establishment in 1943 of the School of Sacred Theology, the first institution in the United States to provide graduate education in theology to women. Although the school closed in 1971, the series named in honor of our legendary president has given voice to nearly 36 respected female theological scholars over the years. At the heart of advancing women's voices in theology is the Campus Center for Spirituality. Arlene Montevecchio leads the center's efforts, and it is only fitting that she should introduce our honored guest tonight. Please welcome Arlene Montevecchio.
Thank you, President Cervelli. It is truly my distinct honor, to introduce tonight's 33rd Madeleva Lecturer, Mercy Amba Oduyoye. Mercy is the director of the Institute of Women in Religion and Culture at Trinity Theological Seminar in Legon, Ghana, a position that is being currently transferred to her niece, Joyce Boham, who is here with us as well. Mercy holds Bachelor of Arts and Master's degrees in Theology from University of Cambridge. Affectionately known as the mother of African women's theologies, Oduyoye is a renowned theologian, educator, writer, and mentor. For decades, she has worked tirelessly to address issues of poverty, healthcare, youth empowerment, women's rights, and global unrest. She is an influential leader in the ecumenical movement. Her involvement spans over 50 years. She was the first woman president of the Ecumenical Association of Third World Theologians and the founder of the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians, an organization that encourages African women to research, write, and publish their own books. Oduyoye also served as Deputy General Secretary for the World Council of Churches. She has authored Beads and Strands, Introducing African Women's Theology, Hearing and Knowing, and many other books and articles. Oduyoye was a visiting lecturer at Harvard Divinity School, Union Theological Seminary, Episcopal Divinity School, and Candler School of Theology. She is a recipient of 7 honorary degrees, including doctorates from Chicago Theological Seminary and Yale University. Please join me in welcoming Mercy Amba Oduyoye.
Thank you. It is a distinct pleasure and a joy to be able to stand here and join the 32 people who have already delivered this lecture. When I received the invitation, I said to myself, now, who is Madeleva? So I had to do a bit of research to find out. I said, oh, that's the woman I would have loved to sit with. Whenever I have a new step in my life that I don't understand, I used to go to my mother and to say, see, so-and-so is asking me to do such and such. What do you think of it? And she will say, it has already been written in heaven that you were going to do this, so you better go do it. So since she already passed on some years ago, I couldn't ask her, but I said I will come, and I am here. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for coming this beautiful spring evening to hear me. I hope it will be worthwhile. I was but 17 years of age when J.B. Dankwa, a prominent historical figure in Ghana, then Gold Coast, became a guest of my parents at the Methodist Mission House in Winneba. He was a politician on a campaign tour. Dankwa was a lawyer, a philosopher, a researcher into Akan religion and culture, and when he was leaving, he gave me a signed copy of John Stuart Mill, The Subjection of Women. I was an avid reader, so I began reading happily. The going was heavy. I understood nothing, and eventually simply kept the book because it was a gift from J.B. Dankwa. Later on in life, and to this day, I realize how much of a gift it was. And now often wonder why he gave me this gift. As I began doing my reading and reflection for this lecture, I mentioned this episode to my life companion, research assistant. I don't know what you will think, but that's what I describe, Shannon Clarkson, friend and research assistant. Adding that I had lost the book. Shannon immediately went online and ordered a copy from Dover Publications in its thrift edition. Now, reading the book as an octogenarian, remember I was 17 when I received it, I find the following pages. He writes, all causes, social and natural, combine to make it unlikely that women should be collectively rebellious to the power of men. They have therefore put everything in place to enslave their minds. The masters of all other slaves rely for maintaining obedience on fear, either fear of themselves or religious fears. The masters of women wanted more than simple obedience, and they turned the whole force of education to effect their purpose. All women are brought up from the very earliest years in the belief that their ideal character is the opposite of that of men. Not self-will and government by self-control, but submission and yielding to the control of others. All the moralities tell them that it is the duty of women, and all current sentimentalities that it is their nature to live for others, to make complete abnegation of themselves, and to have no life but their affections. And by their affections are meant only ones they are allowed to have. Those to the men with whom they are connected, or to the children who constitute an additional and indefeasible tie between them and a man. I have kept saying, how very true. And as I read from my context of an African woman in the 21st century, and not a European in the 19th century, I have said how very little things have changed. This lecture, focusing on African women and precisely on the theologians among them, and specifically the writings of those who belong to the circle of concerned African women theologians, which I initiated in the mid-1970s, and with collaboration of others inaugurated in 1989. Throughout our researches, we confronted again and again what Mill wrote about the subjection of women in the 19th century, saying that women are programmed to live for others. Only recently, I was reading the first chapter of the book of Esther and analyzing the dethronement of Vashti with the wives of the senior pastors of a church in Ghana. They all joined me lustily to chant, and Vashti said no. And then they respond, and Vashti said no. We identified what I labeled as the Memucan fear, the counseling that emanates from self-interest. And many examples came from the participants. I'm telling this because I was astonished in the end to find that the majority of the women were not in agreement with Vashti. She should not have said no to her husband, the suzerain, however unreasonable the demand. Mill was right. They have been well educated. From the time of Ahasuerus to that of Mill to this 21st century, Africa has changed, but women are expected to remain subjective and self-giving. Let me add a Ghanaian example. One of the founders of the school, the high school I attended, J.K. Agri, wrote in the logbook of Wesley Girls High School something to the effect that when you educate a woman, you educate a family, and that when you educate a man, you educate an individual. Agri was on a campaign trail to promote girls' education. He himself was an Mfanti man, an African, who believed and agreed with the parents that the reason death of women was to marry, establish families, raise the children, and seek the well-being of the family. Men are to be educated and programmed to be individuals who are seeking their own well-being, and in the end, they are educated to become individualistic. The subject of this lecture confirms that human community expects women to seek the well-being of the whole community through seeking their health and healing, and in this is at the center of their well-being. This is at the center of the well-being, the shalom of the community. What makes women continue to accept and remain in this ministry, even though this fundamental question is not the subject before us? One of our sources, Dorcas Akitunde, raises it at the beginning of her essay in relation to caring for the well-being of the family, which Yoruba community assigns solely to women. She calls for the participation of men and women, saying it makes sense that both men and women should be involved in the provision of care that brings healing to community. This, he says, is her opinion. I think it's the opinion of many of us, too. In the topic, you found Africa. When I say I'm talking about Africa, that's not possible. I cannot talk about all of Africa. So my Africa is the Africa that I know, the Africa of the women who belong to the circle of concerned African women theologians. And we are mostly from West Africa, from Eastern and Southern, from Nilotic Africa. And even when I have mentioned the countries in these places, I'm not talking about the whole country. When I talk about Ghana, I'm not talking about the whole of Ghana. What saves our use of Africa is that there is a lot that we have in common. So when you hear me say Africa, don't think that I know everything about the 32 or so countries and the milliards of ethnic groups and all those languages. No. But from my association with the World Council of Churches, with the All Africa Conference of Churches, with the Ecumenical Association of Third World Theologians, and with the Circle, I have come to know Africa a little bit. And I have come to hear a lot about Africa. We also need to know about the religions I'm talking about. I think we all kind of more or less know about the many religions that are on that continent. We know Christianity thoroughly, all of us. And we know something of Islam. But Africans have indigenous religions before these missionary religions came to the continent. And those religious intimations have fueled the culture, and they are mixed up in the culture. Sometimes it's very difficult to separate what is religion and what is culture. So I joined some of the men theologians to use the terminology religio-culture. So when we're dealing with healing, we are looking at what the Christians, those who, when they feel forms, say, I'm Christian, and the Muslims and the traditionalists do with religion. The simplest description I have given to the African traditional religion, and even the name is debated. People call it different names. I say it is a triangle of reality, because the men who created the discipline, the Parindas and the Mbitis and the Idos, being men, they saw a hierarchy, a triangle, a hierarchy, with the supreme being, God, perched on top, and the spirit beings, and then the human beings, and the rest of nature. No. For me, the triangle of reality that the African religion, traditional religion, is looking at is not hierarchical. It's not a triangle or a pyramid. I have rounded this male stream triangle with its connotations of hierarchy into a circle of relationships, which I believe represents the true ontology, a word they like to use and which I don't understand. The well-being, holistic life, peace, and harmony for all creation. That is what the traditional intimations of religion meant in Africa. You will also hear me talk about women theologians. Women theologians, both lettered and unlettered, are in my mind when I say women theologians. I'm not talking about those who have been to seminary or university and have PhDs and I don't know what, and write and propose theories of different types. I'm not talking about them only. I'm talking about theologians like my grandmother, who sang her theology. My grandmother, whose singing created a church. All those women that we were not listening to, we are listening to them through the circle and learning from them. You will hear many times the circle, and the circle. Now, what is this circle? The circle was founded in 1989 in Trinity Theological Seminar under circumstances which led me to say that we were going to exorcise the demon of patriarchy from the seminary. I don't think we succeeded very much. Because it is only recently that Trinity has appointed a woman permanently on the staff. And this is an institution that was founded in 1942, and at which my father has taught for 6 years. So my father is part of this male stream that will not appoint women to that seminary. The circle was founded to enable African women theologians to research, write, and publish so that we can say our own words. We have been asked several times, why do you call yourself the circle? We are a circle because a circle expands forever. It covers all who wish to hold hands, and its size depends on each other. It is a vision of solidarity. It turns outwards to interact with the outside, and inward for self-critique. A circle expands forever. It is a vision of accountability. It grows as the other is moved to grow. A circle must have a center, but a single dot does not make a circle. One tree does not make a forest. A circle, a vision for cooperation, mutuality, and care, does not harbor exclusiveness. And that is why we have gone on to name ourselves the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians. Now, my subject has to do with health. We negotiated the subject as Women in Africa, Spirituality, Health, and Healing in the Theological Perspectives derived from the works of the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians. The African women theologians came together, as I said, 89 in Trinity. But we had been working since the middle of the 70s with a specific aim of writing. So what I'm going to do is to look at the writings of the African women theologians and share with you what they have researched and written on health and healing. In a volume titled African Women, Religion and Health, edited by Isabel Apal, the Circle Women's Voices are found on religion and health. In the introduction, the editors state that the volume is about how religion has enhanced or denied women's health. They write, health is understood in its broad context, encompassing the physical, emotional, psychological, and social domains. By the same yardstick, researches and writings and analysis of violence have been wide-ranging. Violence against women has been the arena of the educational events of the Women in Religion and Culture Institute, where Joyce now works. The institute is the face of the circle in Ghana, because it is the Circle's project on women, religion, and culture that we were developing in Ghana. These researches have exposed what has come to be labeled harmful traditional practices, HTPs. And African Women's Development Fund has supported these efforts with funds as well as educational events. Though the Institute, unlike the Circle, did not make publication central, it still includes, in the few published works, a book with the title, When Silence is No Longer an Option, in which these harmful traditional practices are exposed. A second publication bears the title, Too Painful to Tell. And I can tell you, when I went to the publisher to find out, it's a little book like this. where the book was at. The young man who was doing the word processing was sitting at his computer crying. So I said, I thought I was going to collect the book today. What's happening? So I can't type these things. They remind me so much of what my mother went through. Too painful to tell. In these sources of violence against women, are examined, domestic violence is examined, the wide spectrum of its occurrences. Physical battering, psychological, verbal abuse, denial of human and conjugal rights. These are diseases. These are diseases. If one is not at ease in one's own home, how can she thrive in the wider community? Both the Circle and the Institute have published on domestic violence, as well as joined women activists to seek legislation and public instruments to expose and deal with domestic violence. This source of ill health for women was for long hidden under the cloak of privacy. African women were admonished not to wash their dirty linen in public. So the wounds festered and became cancerous, spreading to all aspects of domestic relations and turning homes that should be havens into hellholes for women. A third publication, People of Faith and the Challenge of HIV/AIDS, exposes the health issues that fall to women in this state of crisis around the globe. This crisis is shrouded in deep silence because of the stigma involved. The harmful traditional practices silencing women makes it possible for all manner of diseases and ill health to plague the lives of African women. Unable to remain silent, African women theologians joined in the research and activism of other women globally, as well as in their own countries. These harmful traditional practices include trochosi, that I have written fuller on it, the female genital mutilation that you know about, the double standards in sexual ethics that results in the tolerance of multi-sexual partners for men that shows up in polygyny and has devastating influence in the spread of HIV/AIDS. It's now beginning to call for fresh attention to masculinity. What does it mean to be a man? Men's license for having sexual relations as ritual cleansing activity with widows, with minors, thinking that by that they will be healed of HIV/AIDS. Somebody had to open this out and say it out aloud. The sources of violence against women are multiple and devastating as they bring ill health and lack of total well-being. The marriage of minors, 6, 12, 13, a wife and a mother when she is a child. But it happens. And somebody has to talk about it. Because the actual physical ill health that it brings these little women, very well known. It has become a cliche. Once we begin to raise these issues and talk about and publish and call for reforms, The usual response is, women they are their own worst enemies. We have to question that. We have to question that. The inheriting of widows by the departed husband's kinsman brings a lot of ill health. We have actual examples of women who have gone or been pushed into marriages where they knew there was AIDS possibility. Their families had sent them back into those marriages. They had contracted AIDS and had died. Their families prefer being able to go around saying, our daughter is married, to having a live woman that is not married. So it's better that she's dead. Is that ill health or what? But these are realities. These are not imaginary stories or just research things. These actually happen. In this year of our Lord 2018, just 3 months ago, something happened in Ghana that I was sitting at the TV and saying, oh my God, when are we going to stop this? Girls could not go to school because they were to cross a river. And that river has menstruating women as taboo. So when the girls are menstruating, they cannot cross the river to go to their school, which is at the other side of the river. Doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, especially as there are women who are in illegal mining in this same river. And I can bet you some of the women were menstruating. But that one is dealing with some man's money and the women wanting a little bit of the fall off from the table for them. Girls cannot go to school because they are menstruating. If there is anything that is ill health, if I were one of those girls, that would kill me. In 1996, at the second Pan-African Conference of the Circle, we were planning to have a session on women's health. So we got some women doctors to come and talk to us and discuss with us the issues surrounding women's health. The first person came beginning with menopause. And everybody was, they were all giggling. Because in that group, I was the only one that looked menopausal at that time. These young sisters of mine did not imagine that 10 years hence, they will need that lecture. But when she started talking about cancers, they knew leukemia, because they know children who have leukemia. They knew prostate cancer. They were very concerned about all the men's cancers and the children's cancers. But that is the situation with women. Other people's health are very serious issues. Their own health is something to giggle about. And we do have stories, real, actual stories, of women who get up from their malarial beds to cook for their family and are unable to eat and go back to bed. That is the state of women's health. In the manuscript, there's a whole section on trochusy, but I want to mention something about trochusy. Trochusy is a religious issue. In the eastern part of Ghana and part of Togo, there is the southern Eves. And they have a system. If a family is in trouble, people are dying, children are not passing their exams, the farm produce is not good, the fishing is not good, they go to the shrine. And they ask the priest, what's going on in our family that nothing is going on, nothing good is going on with us? And this wise man, it's usually a man, this wise man looks around and she says, I know what. Your uncle, grandfather, blah, 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 long ago committed a crime, stole a goat or something, or made a pledge that he didn't redeem. And that is why you're suffering. To get rid of this, bring a virgin girl to the shrine to serve the sentence. I mean, wasn't there something in the Bible that says the fathers have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge? That is trokusi. But, some of them are Christians. And they also know that the Bible also said that that proverb should not be said again. He who eats sour grapes, your own teeth should be set on it. They put it aside, and they victimize these little girls. And they go to serve this ritual slavery. They become the wife of the priest. They have children that the priest doesn't take care of. The families take care of because the priest fathering those children is doing a great service to the family because those children would be ethically upright, morally exceptional. They will not commit any crimes. So they're doing the family a service. I beg your pardon. If that was true, Everland would be a place where you don't see any crime. But the crime is still there. And the young people are suffering for nothing. The young women are suffering for nothing. And this is one of the things that we had worked on, and eventually the manuscript will tell you more about that. Another thing that we have worked on is the female genital mutilation that hit the headlines globally, and you all know very well, and I'm therefore just mentioning that it is part of the source of ill health for women that we need to deal about. It has stayed for so long because it was a taboo to talk about. When the telling itself is taboo, I winced. Such cruelty, such indescribable cruelty. Men want closed box, they say. Men want a closed box so they can open with their own key, says the Famsaj, the midwife. That's what the midwife tells me. Such cruelty, such unpardonable cruelty. I shudder to see the terror in the eyes. It is our culture, says one man. Our religion demands it, says another. Everybody must be made to bleed a little, says the professor. And I bleed as she screams. A woman must be made to bleed a little. I once told Mbiti, look, don't say these things because you're not a woman. And I'm surprised that you don't know that majority of women are bleeding every month. So they don't need to bleed a little. A woman must be made to bleed a little, and I saw. I turn my face as she is made to bleed. She, a trusting child, is tortured into womanhood. And I cringe. Such cruelty, such calculated cruelty. And my father stands by as I weep in my dream, and he wears that look that says, It is up to you. God, forgive our ignorance, but do not forgive our cruelty. A little pain now, they say, will save the pain of single life. God, forgive our ignorance, but do not forgive our idolatry. Do not forgive our bondage to the will of the male. Such cruelty, such idolatrous cruelty, inflicted and endured to please men. But now our sister is dead. Pray let us not repeat the tale of the tailless fox. Let us not reenact the rules of Oshun and cut off our ears to please our mates. We can act. We can stop it. We stand accused by the screams of the haunting eyes of the girl tortured into womanhood. And this is what I wrote the night that in Toronto, I watched a film on FGM shown by Somali women. I have not forgotten this. So with the trauma of Trocosi, with FGM, with widow inheritance, and all of that, what are we doing? What are we doing? The response of the circle, which is research, educate, have programs, and get people to talk about it, they are all there. But I'm bringing you two responses that I have seen in the circle. The one has to do with the Deliverance ministry. I don't know whether you know what the Deliverance ministry is. Does anybody know Deliverance? Please, what is it? Can you help me? Pardon? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. You see, now in Africa, everything that happens, every illness, is not just physical. There is some spiritual issue behind it. And you have to deal with that spiritual issue. So you go to the pastor who will deliver you from the demon that is causing your illness. Sometimes they will say it is a witch. And of course, a witch is naturally your grandmother who is in the village. But I read two approaches to the Deliverance ministry by two women, one of them a Methodist pastor, and the other one a member of the circle. The Methodist pastor has a book that is saying, Deliverance, fact or fancy. And she tells of all the people who have been delivered and how and why, and she herself has been delivered and is now in the Deliverance ministry and is prospering, and comes to the conclusion that deliverance is a fact, not fancy, because after all, Jesus was delivering people from demons, so it's a fact. The other woman that I resourced, the circle woman, said, yeah, okay, deliverance is a fact, but that's not how Jesus did it. The kind of situation that happens in the prayer camps where deliverance takes place is not the kind of situation that we find in the circle, in the Bible. So we have to do something about it. And her issue was that more women should get into the deliverance ministry and deliver the deliverance ministry from these atrocities. which, of course, yours sincerely does not agree with. The other issue that I'm bringing with what causes women's sicknesses and ill health is the AIDS that I mentioned. And with the AIDS, the story I want to call attention to comes from the Muslim community, because both the circle and the institute are multi-religious. And Rabiatu Amma writes the story of a girl very well brought up on the Islamic scripture that says a woman should obey the fathers, the husbands, never say no. And this was a very obedient girl. You have to wait for your father or some male figure to present you with a husband, and obediently you take the husband. Somebody who was living outside Ghana, Britain or US or something, doesn't matter, comes back home looking for a wife. And they present her with this innocent girl. And the man was HIV positive. And the girl develops AIDS. And on her dying bed, she says, Allah, you know I have been a good girl. You know I have been obedient. I have obeyed all that I was expected to obey. Now, I'm highlighting this because ill health and healing have been linked to a theology of a God who punishes. And the demands of this God are very often questionable. It makes one begin to wonder whether this God is a mean man. And then the only way you can stay in your religion is to say God is not a man and God is not mean. God is compassionate. So we hold the compassionate God that is at the beginning of the Quran, we hold that God up and hold our Jesus up. And we say in our sickness, this is the figure we look up to. In all of this, the women have to be healers. In all of these sicknesses, as I started with, the women are expected to be the ones that are dealing with the situation. So let me give you a couple of the women's attempts at healing. Apart from the deliverance ministries, the women have healing devices. Where are we? You know, it's amazing as you grow old, your fingers are no longer sensitive enough, and you want to open one page and you open 3 pages. Does it happen to some of you? Okay, that's what's going on here. Yeah. Women as healers. I want to open this final section of this presentation with a contribution from Dorcas Akitunde, whose words are in this section. Dorcas passed on to the great beyond as her children were preparing to celebrate her 50th birthday. Needless to say, the whole circle was devastated, as she was key to the success and stability of the circle in Nigeria. After we had lost Reverend Dr. Rosemary Edet, who named the circle and gave us its logo. We thought the Nigeria circle was going to disappear when Dorcas died. The first time the circle faced death, it was Chipo Ntombeni from Zimbabwe. She was the youngest when we inaugurated the circle and has some poems in our books titled Daughters of Africa. And what was she supposed to have died of? Malaria. Only recently, Annie Nasimiyu dies. What was it supposed to be? Malaria. How can anybody die of malaria in this day and age? But it's going on. And the need for proper diagnosis, the need for proper hospital care is what is sending many people to their graves prematurely. In addition to being a professor of New Testament and gender studies at the University of Ibadan, Dorcas had birthed 3 children, raised them with her spouse Amos, and the first script in her honor, Women in Development, published in 2015, spells out the caring and caregiving life of Dorcas. She spent a full time of caring for spouse and children. And even for me, who was only a teacher and a senior friend. So you will understand her context for this article as she writes, women are caregivers. All humanity passes through their bodies. Women are healers and healthcare practitioners. I'm sure that she had her share of this. As a biblical scholar, her introduction ended with a reference to Genesis 3:20, where it is written, "Woman is mother of all living humans." Now, this is what compels women to bring health to all who are under their care, and sometimes doing this at the expense of their own health. This factor of lack of attention to self-care does not recur often in women's deliberations because they are meant to look, they are programmed to take care of the community, of the family, not of themselves. Not very different from what Mill was saying. Women as agents of healing has not had high profile, as cited in the examples of Sangoma's traditional healers, women in Southern Africa. And they're doing a lot of traditional healing, but we don't get them recognized. They are gynecologists and pediatricians. That is their area. When women get together to look at their healing practices, we study together, we get into a lot of ritual, because we come from a ritualistic culture, to try and boost the morality of one another. One of these rituals happened when the husband of one of our sisters passed away. And everybody had been praying that he should live naturally. In the end, when the man said, "I want to go home," we said to ourselves, we've been praying the wrong thing. The man wants to go home. So we needed a ritual to accompany him to go home. So instead of a ritual to diagnose the person who is doing him in, who is killing him. We try to find a ritual to accompany him so that his end will be peaceful. There is a lot of revival in the use of traditional Medicare in Africa. And a lot of this, the ill health and the healing are around children. Because in Africa, a woman equals having children. And when somebody dies in Yoruba land, they have a song that they sing. Did this person give birth, or did she or he not give birth? In other words, if you have come to this world and you are not leaving anybody behind, you may as well not have come. So the question of marriage and childbearing is one of the healing rituals that we often devise in our meetings. Trying to get women to see themselves, first and foremost, human beings made in the image of God, attempting to live the life that God has sent them to do. And the life of God is a life of creativity, a life of love, a life of compassion, a life of caring. So don't let anybody tell you that you must move heaven and earth to have a child. I have a friend who told me that, a friend of hers who was having a problem with childcare. The husband says, when they told them in the hospital, oh, she might die in this point, oh, if she dies, she can die, and give me a son. You know, such statements that you think will not happen. And these kinds of statements you can only deal also on the spiritual level and create atmosphere that will support the women. In the revival of the use of traditional Medicare, women as healthcare providers are receiving more recognition. Women's services in the area of childbearing is paramount in Africa. And all these deliverance ministries, a lot of it is around barrenness. If a woman is not having children, or a woman is finding it difficult to find a husband, they say that she has a spiritual husband. No, somewhere, I don't know, in the air someplace. And that's why she is not getting a husband. So she has to be delivered from that demon. And she goes through so much. But I know men who can't find wives. You know? And why are they not being delivered? So the issues that African women have to deal with, a lot of it comes with my question, why is this still going on? Why is this still going on? And why is it that it is in Christianity that we have devised deliverance ministries to compound this? Because when they take somebody to a prayer camp to go and deliver her from the demon of I don't know what, she's being beaten. She's being stabbed. She's being made to drink I don't know what. And she comes back worse than she went in, or doesn't come back at all. And yet more people would be sent. What can we do as women theologians? All we can do is to talk about it and to have discussions with women to say, hey, be careful what is going on here. Because everybody else is saying it's okay. If it wasn't okay, they will not be flocking to these churches and to these prayer camps. So the whole thing sometimes seems to me like fanning the face of the sun with a feather. But someone has to. And that is what we have set ourselves up to do. African women theologians live out a spirituality that flows from their own experiences and urges them into the type of praxis that Dennis Ackerman writes about. Fulata Moyo's experience and the experiences that are in the painful stories that we have researched, the many struggles we have with unanswered prayers. And that is part of the issue that I have with Christianity and with the churches and with our approach to healing. Why wasn't our brother healed? The answer will be, you, Mercy, your faith is not strong enough. That is why he wasn't healed. Or he himself didn't have enough faith. That is why he wasn't healed. I think there are some other approaches to this issue of unanswered prayers. Because finally, what did God tell Job? Where were you? Where were you when I was doing this, that, and the other thing? There may be no reason that we understand. And blessed Jesus, I love this story. The disciples asked Jesus, why is this man born blind? Is it because of his own sin or the sins of his parents? And Jesus was a very polite man. Huh? But if I were answering, I would say, don't ask foolish questions. It is only God who knows. And maybe it is the glory of God. Maybe it is a way to show you another approach to somebody near death, to show you another approach to how to be with, share solidarity, share your life with somebody who is sick. Counseling services that are part of healing, we do get. And usually the counseling services, they go the way I have described it. Your faith is not strong. Let me put in here the word of another of our Muslim sisters, Hajia Katumi. She writes in Empowering Muslim Women for the Third Millennium. She says, the problems of disease, poverty, and war affected women and children most when they occurred. It is enough to urge women's, irrespective of their religious affiliation, to close ranks and join hands in finding solutions to the problems that affect all women. To achieve maximum success, the cooperation of men and women is greatly needed because the issue is one that affects both men and women. So although our subject was women and their role in healing, I'm ending up by saying, when we do that, we're going back to John Stuart Mills and Kwejir Agri, who said it is women only who are programmed to be healers. But we are living in a world where the women themselves are wounded. And these wounded healers are the ones that the whole community is depending upon to do the healing. The Circle's interest in health and healing shows its concern for human rights. It is the right of God's creation, including humanity, to live what God saw and pronounced good in the present state of creation. God will not apply good to a diseased body. Jesus was obvious in his stance on health care. And the women in this lecture, they see health as a human right. And as a result, they participate in healing ventures, as well as attempts to prevent what violates the growth of healthy conditions. Concern for healthy conditions between men and women is linked with the violation of the human rights of women. Landman, South African woman of the circle, has focused a lot on counseling and how the healing processes in counseling have to be intensified and also more modernized. The counseling that include mending broken relations. There is a traditional issue of bringing everything into public to speak. And we think you revive that, and when people feel that they are heard, that alone can be therapeutic. The project of Women in Religion and Culture as a base for an institute to bring women to faith together around these concerns of women's well-being was conceived by me, and a lot have joined. And the basic aim is that we think, instead of saying religion and culture, we should say culture and religion. Because what women want to do in Africa is to cure Africa of the cultures and the religions that are inimical to the health of women and that have women running around to be the healers when they themselves are wounded. We have done the expected, or at least I've done the expected, by giving some definitions, by pointing to areas that you will later read about. I have described how at our conferences we mentor and empower one another with healing activities. Giving an example, how Betty Covenden leads us with creative liturgy, with prayers and poetry, some of which are in our books, and that we worked on restorative role in our HIV/AIDS programs. These have been the words of my sisters in the circle, and my hope is that it can bring health and healing to the hearers and readers of this 33rd lecture of our sister Madeleva. Thank you.
It was beautiful. She's asking me how she did. Thank you, Mercy.
I said it was a little.
Please join me in thanking her again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
We have time for just 3 questions, and I'd like to privilege a St. Mary's student to ask the first question. So any St. Mary's students, we have a microphone circulating. Going once, going twice. Oh, right there, down there.
Hi, I'm Alex Chambry. I'm a St. Mary's senior. I'm a political science and gender and women's studies double major, and I'll be graduating in May.
Oh, wow.
So for my senior thesis, I actually looked into a few countries in Africa and the ways in which more women in political office can help states recover from post-conflict issues. And so I'm actually wondering if you have worked with, if any of the women in the, I hope I'm saying this right, the Circle of African Women Theologians, if any of you have participated in any dialogues with politicians to kind of solve the gender-based violence and the female genital mutilation issues that you've seen in your country.
The closest we come to hands-on is to work with other NGOs who are working on these issues. So the coalition of NGOs in Ghana, for instance, we worked with them to get the widowhood rights, the FGM, the marriage of minors. They're all technically outlawed. Trocosi, they're all technically outlawed. But then the issue is the monitoring to make sure. And there were NGOs who began to find alternatives because the people who are doing the surgery of the circumcision, for instance, it is their business, it is their work. So to give them alternative training. So those are the circle as such. We just talk. We talk, but then we link up with those who have the facility. And the institute, we were in the group in Ghana that was getting legislations over these things. Yeah. Like the Trocosi, we had a legislation against the Trocosi. Unfortunately, it was a so-called church that was promoting it in the end. Yeah.
Two more questions, briefly, please. Down here.
Thank you so much. I'm wondering to what extent. Thank you so much. I'm wondering to what extent do some of these problems, or might some of these problems have a root in colonial patterns of societal relations? So specifically, when you spoke about how the mandate to not air your dirty laundry in public affects relations in such a way that the women are isolated in their own homes, and the wound festers. That to me sounds like a very Euro-American mandate as well, and I'm wondering to what extent do you feel that colonial relations have affected these patterns and made them worse, perhaps?
Well, I think what colonization and Christianity have done is to bolster up what was already there without improving the side that the women had, the power that the women had. For instance, in Ghana, the queen mothers were supposed to be very strong, and the queen mother can get the king dethroned if she does something that is wrong, or can make his rule impossible. But when the British came, they didn't realize that the woman who was sitting behind the king was actually the power. So they asked the king, "Can you give us a piece of land?" And then he says, "Come tomorrow." Everything was come tomorrow, because he has to go and ask the queen mother in private whether to say yes or no. And this went on like that until the men realized that actually with the British, they can stop going to ask the old woman and just give the answer. So the androcentrism, the patriarchy, and all those things were there. But in the tradition, the women had ways of dealing with it, and ways which the colonial laws and so on did not allow. Let me give you a not very nice example, okay? We've had a lot of trouble in Ghana over marital rape. I was in the group that was trying to get legislation through our lawyers, and we hit the rock every time. Why? Because the origin of this marital rape is in the British laws that are still on our books. But we raised the traditional issue that a man does not sleep with a woman who is asleep. In other words, you need consent. And in the tradition, if a man does that, he is in trouble. Because the woman will tell everybody, and they will sing some songs about him that he will run from the village. But that one was gone. And we are left with the British law, which is on our books. Meanwhile, I didn't understand these things. Meanwhile, the British themselves are not operating that law any longer. So that is the colonial thing messes us up a little bit. But I think it is also our own choice that we are staying in this mess. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Last question.
Hello. Hi, I'm Rebecca. Thank you for speaking today. I'm a freshman at Notre Dame, and I'm studying history. So one of the things I've been learning about is like the liberation of Ghana and, how colonialism has affected it, Africa both as like a region and Ghana as a country. So I'm curious, you kind of talked about like the influence of colonialism, but I'm curious how, if you think it created like a dichotomy of either like you're with colonialism or you're totally subscribing to traditional like African culture, do you think that made it harder on women, or do you think that the introduction of colonial practices like made it easier for them, or it forced them to kind of choose? Like, did that exacerbate the situation, or did it make it any better?
Well, actually, the answer to this doesn't change anything. What is happening is what is happening. What we are doing in Ghana and in this post-colonial era in many countries is that the people in power are taking both from the culture, from the traditional culture, and from the British imposition of laws, whatever suits the men. Because most of the parliaments are run by men. And one campaign that we had at the Institute, we were joining some women to get more women into parliament, find ways of getting more women into parliament. And I had a poster in my office, and some young men who came to see me, they looked around and said, "Oh, are there so many women wanting to get into parliament?" They were surprised that women even would think of getting into parliament. So if these are the people who are making the laws, it doesn't matter whether it is the colonial or the traditional. They will pick what suits them. So a lot of people are of the opinion that maybe if we could get more women into the legislature, into the lawmaking and monitoring, perhaps some of these things will change faster. Yeah. I don't know, it's just perhaps.
Oh, wait, I just have a follow-up question to that. Mm-hmm. So you brought up like women's leadership, and one of the things that colonists like to say is that the introduction of churches and Western religion actually elevated women's voices. So is there any truth to that, or did it just suppress them more?
Yeah, it makes us, the Christians, feel very good that we have Christianity. Of course, Christianity brought westernization. And if you are judging us by westernization, then you will say the colonial period brought us the language that I can now speak with you. And they are always telling us that, oh, you are going colonialism. Didn't we give you a language which is global? Okay, so what? God gave you the language. It's a gift from God to you, so you give it to others, and that's it. So the issue of whether colonialism did us good or did us bad, People raise education. Oh, but we brought you Western education. Well, they brought the men also Western education. Huh? So what? And before colonialism, we had systems of education, a lot of apprenticeship kind of thing. Your mother is a potter, and you learn pottery. Or she sends you to an auntie or grandmother who does weaving, and you learn weaving. Those were educational systems. Nobody knows how those would have developed. But our natural development was truncated, and a totally new thing was put in. So it's very difficult to say that we got the best, because we don't know how our own things would have developed. And also, a stigma was placed on everything that was developing from the ground by the Africans. One area which is becoming very clear is traditional medicine. Ghanaians are talking, and when they say orthodox medicine, they mean the Western medicine that had drugs that you buy from the chemist. Now, orthodox, my understanding of orthodox is what belongs to you. Huh? Somebody's belief is heterodox. Your own belief is orthodox. But we sit in Ghana and we say the Western medicine is orthodox, and our own medicine is heterodox. And yet, a lot of the things we are getting in the pharmacies today are herbs. Yeah? And all the food advice that they are giving us are what we always ate, the way we always ate. So, we lost something. We gained a language. That is clear. We gained a global language. For me, apart from that, I have ifs and buts to a lot of what we call colonialism. Thank you.
Thank you, Mercy, so much. We are really privileged to have you. I am pleased to announce our 2019 Madeleva Lecturer, Dr. Nancy Pineda Madrid from Boston College. But I think she has big shoes to fill. And I just invite you all to enjoy refreshments in the lobby. Thank you again.
Thank you.